Healers don't heal in Final Fantasy XIV. Hello, Void, I'm Eldon, and the previous statement was obviously a lie. Healers definitely heal. I mean, look at 95% of their kits. It's all healing spells all the way down. However, it doesn't feel that way when you play, does it? I don't play a lot of healer, but even I recognize that when you're playing healer, it feels like a lot of spam damage and not a lot of actual healing. Now, why is this, and what can we do to fix it? Let's dig into it. So, the first big question we need to answer is, why do healers feel so bad right now? And this problem has existed for a while. If I were to sum it up, I would say that the core issue is that the healers we have now are incompatible with the way they're used in all of the fights we have. Healing in 14 is used to prevent death. It is used either just before or just after damage to prevent the next move from killing other members of the raid. This means that healing is only ever sometimes necessary. There isn't consistent damage that would require healers to be consistently pressing their healing buttons. Instead, healers wait for mechanics to resolve and then react, healing the party back up to full. This means that the amount of healing done is directly proportional to the pace at which mechanics occur, and sadly, mechanics aren't consistently dealing damage to everyone. That leaves healers to spend most of their time dealing damage instead of doing the thing they kinda want to be doing, i.e. healing. This doesn't necessarily have to be a problem, but it becomes one, and a very bad one at that, when healers are designed the way they are now. More specifically, healers in 14 are built around cooldown management. Like with most tab target MMOs, the actual act of healing another party member is pretty simple. You target them and press a button. In 14, that's pretty much as deep as the actual act of healing gets. Instead, 14 healing complexity is built around managing your cooldowns. If you look at the average healer's suite of abilities, they have approximately 10 buttons that heal and 20 buttons that improve or alter healing. It's these remaining 20 ways to heal slightly better once every 2 minutes that make up the majority of a healer's depth. In order to deal with high damage output, you have to consistently cycle different healing abilities so that you can make it past the curve every time. And you have to keep that up for long stretches of time as the fight persists. The problem is that, really, this interesting loop doesn't actually happen in the majority of content in the game. Realistically, you're only engaging as a healer to 100% capacity in the top percent of high-end content. The rest of the time, healers can basically get away without using the majority of their kits. As someone who's only ever really used Scholar in dungeons, I cannot tell you what half of these buttons do, because I don't know, I never had to learn. For the entirety of Endwalker, I only had the basic abilities bound, and I was never punished for it. The design philosophy of cooldown management focused healing is neat in theory, but can't be applied to the majority of the game, and therefore for most of the game, healers feel lackluster. But you might ask, why then can't we just have healers deal a little bit more damage? Do a little bit more interesting damage rotations? That would technically solve the problem. Since healers have a lot of downtime, filling that up with something interesting could be fun. Currently, their filler is just one-button combinations, and that's making up the majority of what they're doing. And if that was more interesting, wouldn't healers be more interesting? It would, but there is a problem with this. The reason why healers have really bad damage rotations is because of the core philosophy of healer design in 14, and it can be summed up in one sentence. Dealing damage should never get in the way of doing healing. This means that the responsibility to deal damage should never interrupt a necessary heal, and since healing may need to happen at any time, this means that doing damage can never be time sensitive. This results in two main things. One, for most healers, none of their cool skills are actually a gain on DPS. For Sage, all of their big-ass lasers do the same amount of damage as a basic pew-pew. For White Mage, this means that your Blood Lily is actually just the 4 GCDs you spent healing converted into one big burst of damage. The second is that there can't be any conditions to acquire more damage. The reason there's no basic skill combo on healers is because casting a healing spell would interrupt that combo, and therefore you might not want to cast the healing spell. It means that none of their abilities can actually deal a lot of damage, because you're supposed to be saving them for when you need healing, not wasting them on a 2-minute burst window. The healer healing should always remain the priority, and that leaves the damage side of their kit anemic and entirely unfulfilling. Now, before we get to fixing this, there is one last thing I have to mention, and that is the other job in the room. Tanks. Tanks in 14 have, over time, gotten increasingly better at healing themselves. At this point, a warrior doesn't even need a healer in a dungeon. They can do all of the healing themselves. This means that for healers, especially in lower levels of content, a lot of their responsibilities no longer exist, because tanks can heal a majority of the chip damage that they take from things like auto attacks and dots. The healers are left with even less to do in low-level content than they already would have, considering the lack of consistent damage already. So, healers are basically trapped at the center of this complicated knot of design issues that have evolved over the course of this game's long lifespan. But what it does leave us with is an interesting opportunity. Let's get into the solutions. But before we do that, I do want to take a little moment here just to explain why I've talked so much about low-level content. One of the common refrains is that it all works in high-level content, but there is a problem in that logic. 14 is a game with a content structure in the shape of a pyramid. Low-level content is always necessary to unlock the higher-level content, and as such, the amount of people who play the low-level content will always be higher than the amount of people who play the higher-level content. There are roulettes, basic experiences, even the low-level grinds all count as low-level content. Only a small percentage of it actually exists at a high level. Realistically, we can't design the entire game around the top end of performance, because it leaves the majority of stuff in the game feeling lackluster and compromises the foundation on which this game is built. The ideal situation is that we build mechanics of the game around interesting, low-end experiences, and then take the fundamentals we construct there and require maximalization of it when it comes to high-end play. Basically, jobs should be fun in dungeons, and the fun design there should be tested in Savage. So, how do we fix healers? Let's start with one of the more common solutions that I don't think will work, or is even really necessary, and that is stopping tanks. It's bandied about pretty often that we just need to stop the tank being able to heal themselves, and that would make healers more interesting. I don't think that solution would work. Realistically, the amount of healing tanks do only really comes online in dungeons for chip damage or in really tight situations. Taking that away would make the healer job feel special, but it would only really mean they press a couple more cures during dungeon runs. It doesn't really fix the fundamental issues, and it also robs tanks of a very interesting part of their identity. When I'm playing a tank, I get those moments where I can heal myself, and it makes me feel incredible, proportionately far cooler than I don't as a healer, not being able to use some of the basic elements of my kit. It's a patch solution, and one that takes away more than it gives. The next solution frequently given that I also think probably won't work is changing fight design. I think it might be a good start. At low end, having more damage so that healers can make the most of their kit could be really useful. But doing that also risks significantly increasing the base difficulty beyond what could be reasonable. It would also make healers far more important than any other role in an encounter. A bad healer could absolutely sink a dungeon run, a result that would likely lead to a lot more toxicity, especially in low-level content, something I don't think any of us want to see. The other, more substantial problem with changing fight design is that you can't realistically go back and change every fight. Final Fantasy XIV is a game that exists inside of its history. With the roulette system and the importance of old grinds and maintaining player activity, the older content in this game is often as relevant as newer content. Sure, we can make incremental changes to new fights, especially newer raid tiers, but Where the issue really stands out is in the roulette level experience that exists throughout all of 14's dungeons. It's an unreasonable ask, and one they won't go back and do, to change all of the previous dungeon fights to make them more fun for healers. So it's not a solution that should be looked at as the primary goal. Instead, we need to find a solution that makes healers more fun in the context of currently existing fight design. And that means we need to change the way healers work. There are two ways in which I want healers to change. I want to make healing harder and damage more complex. Let's start with the damage side of things, because that's probably easier to explain. I want healers to have more complex rotations than pressing one button and a dot every 30 seconds. It's not a big ask. Things like big damage gains, new skills, gauge spenders that deal damage, and possibly even more. I don't really expect healers to get as complex a damage rotation as like a caster, and actually I think it would be really bad if they were. But creating a simple basic combat system similar to how like tanks work would probably do wonders, especially in experiences where healing is less important. If they really want to change up the designs, it's even possible they could go for an increase in combination damage and healing skills. The problem with those as they currently exist is that to use a damage skill, you sacrifice the healing. And since all healing is considered a necessary reactive mechanic, you can't really have a damage gain while sacrificing healing. The best you can do is have a skill that heals while maintaining your damage output. If they start adding big burst skills that do a burst of healing and a burst of damage, that could be really fun, especially if you have to build up to them. I think probably the best way to make that work is either to have a few charges of them, or just to have them focus more on shielding and overhealing. That way they can be both reactive and preventative. There's actually a lot of room to play around with these ideas with healer damage rotations, being something that is like at your disposal rather than a necessary cycle. Let's take Sage for instance. Currently you get your charges of Dyscrasia from a shield break. This is cool as a movement mechanic, but when shields break inconsistently, it means that having it be a damage gain leads to a lot of damage fluctuation. This isn't necessarily a bad thing and can be cool for optimization, but it could be better. We could have Dyscrasia trigger whenever you successfully hit your basic laser. This gives you a lot more stacks and lets it be a more consistent gain. It also turns into kind of a Dark Knight's TBN style thing, where you want to keep enough stacks where you can react and shield someone to gain a little bit extra damage. You want to keep enough stacks that you can move when you want, but drain them fast enough that if a shield breaks, you don't overflow. Having a more consistent gain also lessens the impact of being based solely on shields. This kind of more interesting and more complex mechanics can exist across a bunch of different healers. White Mage could gain stacks of quick cast from using their lilies. Scholar can have something to do with their fairy. There's a bunch to do as long as we are willing to play around with the idea that damage and healing can coexist. There's also a world where these systems become separated entirely, and that also works, where healing rotations are stable but delayable and happen in their own time, with healing being able to happen at any point in time without reacting to the damage. And I think maybe one job that does that could be really fun, but I think the more interesting world is one in which healing and damage feed into each other in really fun and novel ways. But at the end of the day, that's only half the battle. Healers don't want to be discount DPS that occasionally heal people. They want to be healers. In order to do that, we need to change the healer's path to power. Each job in 14 has a series of moves and skills that they execute in a specific order to be powerful. For healers, this has been cooldown management. But, as discussed earlier, that doesn't really work. Instead, what I propose is a new focus for the healer path to power. A new focus for high-end healing and low-end healing alike. And that is to increase the difficulty by which large amounts of healing can be done. Currently, mid and low-level heals are fairly easy to do, and high-output heals can be achieved as long as you press a few buttons. Instead of having this buff-based healing, I think we should have more combinational healing. Picture this. You only have a few easy access quick heals at your disposal. maybe one single target OGCD on a decent cooldown, your basic cure, and this is key, no quick AoE option. In order to deal with large amounts of damage or damage dealt to your group, you have to combine multiple abilities. Perhaps you have a resource that you can build up. Perhaps you have to heal in a certain way. But the only way to access the wider scale, more powerful healing is to do something a little bit complicated. These stronger heals are on a shorter cooldown, but still require a little bit of effort to use. At the same time, quicker, more readily accessible heals can act as like a patch. They're either a lot less efficient or on a much longer cooldown, so you have a few points at which you can make up for that lack of easy healing, but realistically, the main goal of healing now is to predict when a move is coming out and prepare a more powerful heal. Instead of at high end only managing cooldowns, you instead predict mechanics coming up and then burn cooldowns for intermediate or surprise damage. If we gut the middle end of healing, gut the ability for low end damage to be easily ignored, then the tools we use at the highest end become the same tools used at the lowest end to deal with the average mechanic. Then we can make all the healing more interesting instead of restricting the core mechanic of the job to being done only at the highest level of content. Core healing can apply to all damage in the game. If you can't easily heal a group and instead have to use the same mechanics that apply at the height of the most dire circumstances, then there's no reason why you can't focus on making those heals the most enjoyable. The last concern we probably should address is healer fear. If healing does become harder, people might become more afraid of healing, but I don't think that is something we should really be building around. Healing isn't fun right now, and I think unfun healing causes just as much people to not play the job as healing being intimidating. Besides, making healing more difficult doesn't necessarily mean increasing the bar for new healers to start healing. It just changes their focus. If anything, making healers' path to power more accessible in low-level content would prepare people better for entering high-end healing. If I go into Extreme or Savage right now with little healing experience, I'm essentially only able to learn the job in the middle of that high-end content. If we synchronize the low-end and high-end experience for healers, then we can make it so that people can actually learn the job in the areas of the game designed for learning. The only reasonable solution to making healing fun in this game is to make healing harder, to make the act of doing even the most basic heal something that is definitionally engaging. And the only way to make that necessary is to make it so there's no middle road option. Yeah, let's cut Medica, or at least make it like 5,000 mana to use. Healers don't heal because this game doesn't deal damage. And that means in order to make healing fun, we have to make use of all the damage we can get. Also add in damage rotations, but I think that's like a given. Anyway, that's my idea. Let me know what you think. If you think it's good or bad, leave a comment. If you have problems with it, definitely leave a comment. Like or dislike, it's up to you. Just don't say the game sucked. That's not the discourse I want to see down there. Anyway, since you made it to the end of the video, I'm gonna plug something. This is my game, Pilgrim Unto Shadow. It's a upcoming 0D indie action RPG. And if that sounds like a mouthful, just know I think it's pretty fun. The demo should be coming out later this month, so keep it in mind. Anyway, Void, thanks for sticking out. I really appreciate you watching this video and hope healers can be better soon. It's a long road out there, so have a good walk down it and heal when you can. Goodbye.